The Forum at 8 on SAfm.
It's 9 minutes after 8 here on the Forum at 8 with me, Darshan Mudley. Thanks so much for your time today. They say there's 3 essential qualities for any translator or interpreter. Those 3 qualities are a very high degree of linguistic proficiency, a quick mind, and the ability to stay calm under stressful conditions. But recently, it seems our interpreters have come under the spotlight, both from international and local media, for making mistakes. And that's been in the rather high-profile murder trial of Olympian Oscar Pistorius. On the first day of the trial, proceedings were delayed after the Afrikaans English interpreter, who initially agreed to interpret, was then suddenly unavailable. The substitute interpreter, who translated Michelle Berger's statements during her cross-examination, was ridiculed for her failure to interpret some of the witnesses' statements, in fact, by Pistorius' own lawyer, who then asked, "Some of the words are not of what I'm saying," and confirmed that to the court. Recently, Chief Justice Mogoeng spoke about how the poor quality of court interpreters actually led to the miscarriage of justice. I'll read out a quote from him shortly. But first, on the Forum at 8, I'm asking you this question. Is justice compromised by interpretation, by translation in South Africa? We've got 11 official languages. How does that affect justice? And is it compromised by interpretation in our courts? 34701, if you'd like to SMS us, costs you R2 to do so. Tweet or Facebook the show right now, AM Live on SAfm, or give us a call. The line's open, 0891 104 208. That number again, 0891 104 208. Let's introduce my guests who are going to be joining me for this hour. On the line to Johan Blow, who's the chairman of the South African Translators Institute. Mr. Blow, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
You're most welcome. Joining us as well is Kirsten Whitworth, who we've spoken with before. Kirsten Whitworth is an attorney at the Basic Services Program. It's at the Center of Applied Legal Studies, CALS as they're known. Kirsten, good to speak to you again. Good morning.
Good morning, Darshan.
Also joining us on the line, Joe Ngalanga is a magistrate in Pretoria and the chairperson of the Education and Training Committee at the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. Joe Ngalanga, thank you very much for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
And I'm sure many of you are wondering, where's the Department of Justice in this conversation? Advocate Elias Mata joining me just after 8:30, the head of court services at the Department of Constitutional Development and Justice. So they will also have an opportunity to engage on this topic. We'd love to hear from you, though. Is justice compromised by interpretation? You've been able to follow the intimate details of the Oscar Pistorius trial. What have you gleaned from that information? And in regards to Mogoeng's statement, the Chief Justice of South Africa, I want to read out his comments now for you. He was speaking at an annual general meeting of the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa in Benoni, and he said, "An interpreter is a second judge in a trial because people lose cases as a result of poor interpreters. I don't know who trains these people," he said. He even said, and this was quite concerning, I'm sure, to interpreters, that they were willing to take the job of interpretation away from the from interpreting organizations and into the judiciary, because we know what it takes to be a good interpreter, saying the Chief Justice there. Mr. Blow, your reaction to that statement by the Chief Justice?
It is, to some extent, a very strange statement coming from somebody in justice, because the Department of Justice is responsible for appointing and training court interpreters. So that is, to me, a very strange way of commenting on the quality of the people who are appointed by the Department of Justice. And I must hasten to add that there are really competent interpreters in the service of the Department of Justice with years of experience. And people who might not be even mother tongue speakers of Afrikaans, who would have done an equally good job to the normal professional interpreter who could have been hired in, who would not have been a staff member of the Department of Justice.
Joe Ngalanga, who trains interpreters in the country?
The last time I knew is that the interpreters were trained by Justice College, which is a section of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, based here in Pretoria. So the last time I know that kind of training was in the hands of Justice College.
Miss Whitworth, I mean, your take on interpretation services in the country, are we making too much of this? Or at the end of the day, as the Chief Justice says, people's lives are on the line here, and interpreters are almost a second judge in these cases.
I don't think that interpreters are second judges in these cases, but I think that we are absolutely making far too little of this issue. It's taken a high-profile case for this to come into the spotlight. We need a high-profile athlete and a murder trial for it to be something that people are concerned about. It was also looked at in recent years. There were 2 rhino poaching cases. There were 2 Vietnamese accused in the Western Cape who had to be released because they couldn't find a Vietnamese interpreter. There was a Thai accused in Gauteng. They couldn't find a Thai interpreter. And those got some press because rhino poaching at the moment is such a hot topic, and there's millions and millions of rand in the anti-rhino poaching campaign, and lots of people are looking at it. But my concern is, what about the hundreds and thousands of people in informal settlements and in rural areas who are absolutely fluent in 4, 5, 6 official languages but cannot access justice because they do not speak English and Afrikaans at a level that would be expected for them to be competent enough in the high courts to access justice. And they don't have the press that Oscar Pistorius does, and they don't have the budget that Oscar Pistorius does. And they're being ignored because they don't have the profile. So I'm absolutely thrilled that this is finally becoming an issue, and we're discussing it, because it's so long overdue.
Well, as you say, we're asking important questions right now, and really it's been brought to the limelight because of the Oscar Pistorius trial, and many lauded this. The media activists who we've spoken to over the last few weeks have lauded this as a win for open justice, for us to be able to understand the intricate nature of court cases, the way that cross-examination works. It's fascinating to even listen to the people who respond to Barry Rue, for example, Pistorius' lawyer, and say, oh, he's cross-examining, asking the same question over and over and over again. But this is what happens in court. We're getting an understanding of the way that court proceedings are working. But Mr. Blow, are we being left embarrassed at the way that interpretation services are working within these courts?
I have no doubt that it is working only to a limited extent. If you have the normal magisterial court cases, the lower court cases, there are experienced interpreters who work in those courts, who've been working there for years, who've gone through training and so on. But the problem comes in with unexperienced people who are taken in on the basis of their linguistic ability only, on a freelance basis, to interpret ad hoc, because you have no quality control over those people. And if you are looking to find somebody within the Department of Justice, and you only use the criterion that the person has to be able to speak, in this instance then, both Afrikaans and English, but you don't ask whether the person has any interpreting experience, then you must expect to end up with a disaster like this.
Well, that sounds surprising, Mr. Blow, because isn't that the first question that you ask? How high a degree of your linguistic proficiency do you have, and do you have the ability to interpret? I mean, those seem like key questions for a job like this, of a court interpreter.
Exactly, and those questions are not asked.
Mr. Joe Ngelanga, I mean, are these questions not being asked of our interpreters when they come into court?
I think the assumption usually is that if one has been brought into court as an interpreter of a particular language, the presumption is that everything is in place, that this person is conversant to the language he's going to interpret in. And secondly, that by virtue of being recruited, it means that person is able to do the job.
So how are these individuals getting into the system without the proper qualifications, without the proper experience then?
The fact of the matter is that most of interpreters in South Africa at the moment come from ranks of people with matric. And I think here, without being political, definitely the issue of education will come in, because most of those matriculants are matriculants who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who have gone to township schools, who have gone to the most poor schools, and where English or Afrikaans is not their mother tongue, and they are supposed to interpret in those languages. I think to me that's an inherent problem in the system. Poor quality of education from which you draw these people. So remember that people who are the cream of the crop, matriculants, definitely wouldn't, interpreting wouldn't be, unless this is a passion, wouldn't be one of the key interesting fields to follow. So definitely the crop you get definitely is going to be the crop that's got nothing else to do except for being court interpreters.
20 minutes past 8. We're going to open up the lines right after this, 0891104208. How do these individuals get in with just matric in being able to interpret at a court level? And if we read this together with Mogoeng's comments, the Chief Justice, that an interpreter is the second judge in a case, are we leaving the second judge with just a matric to judge this? 34701 if you'd like to write in, 0891104208. We'll take your calls right after this. 20 minutes after 8. This is AM Live on SAfm, Forum at 8.
This summer's hottest hatch, the Volvo V40 T3, can be yours with 0% deposit from just $3,699 per month. Offer over 72 months. Retail price $292,500. Rate to customer 4.69%. Balloon payment $81,900. Cost to customer $384,577. Subject to credit approval by Volvo Car Financial Services, a division of Westbank and FirstRand Bank Limited, an authorized financial services and credit provider. Offer includes VAT and CO2 emissions tax and is available while stocks last. Another reason to consider Volvo.
As a business owner, you know this all too well. Cash flow is volatile. Some months you have plenty of cash and other months you don't. So what you need from a bank is flexibility. Nedbank offers you just that, and it's a first in South Africa. With their revolving business credit card, you only have to pay 5% of your outstanding balance every month. And when you do settle early, you get cash back. This means not only greater flexibility, but real business benefits. It's the kind of solution you'd expect from a partner that understands your business.
Sign up for Nedbank's comprehensive business offering by visiting simplybiz.co.za and make cash flow happen. Nedbank is proud to vote small business. We are an authorized financial services and credit provider. Terms and conditions apply. Make things happen. Nedbank.
The Forum at 8 on SAfm.
Is justice compromised by interpretation? 0891104208. Jacques and Lerato calling in. Jacques, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Jacques.
Just a moment of levity, considering the seriousness of what you're talking about. This morning on SAfm, the court reporter reporting on yesterday's events said it became clear from the evidence of the third witness that the evidence of the third witness collaborated the evidence of the first witness. Meaning, of course, that they corroborated the evidence. I thought it was, considering Mr. Roos' tremendous efforts yesterday, it was quite thoughtful of her to suggest that they collaborated their evidence.
Well, we picked up that one as well, Jacques. Thanks for that call there, Jacques at Margate. Well, language is so important, and I guess that's what's coming out today. But even more important when someone's fate hangs in the balance. Lerato in Cape Town works as a professional sign language interpreter. Lerato, you must feel embarrassed by this conversation on some level.
Thank you so much, Darshan, and also good morning to your panel. Actually, I am not embarrassed.
No?
I'm glad. No, I'm not. I'm glad that at last interpreters and even translators, and by the way, there's a difference between an interpreter and a translator.
Okay, what is that?
Because I hear people talking about the translation was bad. The translation, and Johan Blow will also knows better, that the translation is in written form and interpretation is verbally. So we interpret verbally and then we translate in written form. And the reason why I'm saying that, I'm glad that at least now, especially for sign language interpreters, the spotlight is on us and even interpreters, because, I feel that the interpreting and translation professional service in South Africa, our profession is not recognized, and we are not even given that platform where we can express how we feel. I know that as interpreters and translators, especially for interpreters, we have code of ethics, there's confidentiality, and there's a lot of things. Even what is happening in the court is compromised, because there are certain things that an interpreter is not supposed to say, and you don't have a right to air your views.
Lerato, I hear what you're saying, but let me play devil's advocate for a second, because Lorato, there's others out there who would say, well, and let's take what the magistrate told us this morning, that there's some who work as interpreters today in courts that barely have a matric, that just have a matric qualification. They're not Lorato, let me finish the point. They're not maintaining the high standards of language proficiency that we'd want to see from them in court. So how are we supposed to be praising your profession, praising those who work in the profession, when there's so much criticism for it? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I think the buck also stops with the Justice Department. The Justice Department has a responsibility to ensure that people who are appointed in courts, especially in the Oscar Pistorius case, it's a high-profile case. You cannot just take someone who's not experienced, because all interpreters, they also specialize in their profession. We have educational interpreters, we have the justice interpreters, we have the community liaison interpreters. So you must, when you go and interpret in court, the legal jargon, you must be au fait with that. You must know which terms to use, which relevant terms. Like, for instance, the Judge Rule was like saying, did he shout or did she yell or did he scream? So there's a difference, and the bang as well. We have to know how to convey that message and convey that message accurately. And apart from that, as an interpreter, there is so much pressure. There is media there. So there is a lot of things going on. So your coping mechanisms as well should be really, really, you should know how to cope.
Lorato, it's a tough job.
It is. It's not an easy job. It's really not an easy job. You always have to think on your toes as well.
Lorato.
So I'm glad that at least SAfm is giving, us a voice to raise, because even the public doesn't know about the role of an interpreter. You interpret in Parliament, there's a problem. They don't know what is the role of an interpreter. They don't know what is the role of a translator. The community needs to be educated, and the Justice Department should spearhead this and also collaborate with the tertiary institutions, because even our youngsters are not even encouraged to speak their mother tongues. The only language that now is spoken is English. So people should know that the linguistical education is important in the community, even in the tertiary level, and even our kids. And the interpreters should be, encouraged to express themselves in, be it whether you interpret from Sesotho into English or you interpret from English into Sesotho. You should be fluent and should know both. You should be au fait with the linguistical structures of both languages.
Lorato, thanks for that call there, Lorato in Cape Town. I didn't want to cut her off because she is quite passionate and obviously very involved in this, and so a great insight into what someone within the industry thinks on it. 0891104228. We'll take Lorato in Kempton Park, and then I think we've got David as well. Lorato, good morning.
Good morning to you, Dashan, and your guests. I wish to preface my comment by saying I have not had any, or I don't know how the training with interpreters work, particularly in the justice system. However, I am wondering, ordinarily pilots, because they carry lives whenever they fly from point A to point B, it is law that they must do recurrent training so that they are regularly assessed on their fitness to ordinarily fly those aircrafts. And perhaps the debate now is actually moving to the point where we should be asking, it should not only be in terms of justice. We should look at a number of areas where ordinarily certain people or certain careers should have recurrent training, so that we then reassess, because I imagine it's not only about the nuances of language, particularly in the court interpretation. Right. It is also about what are some of the things that are improving in a specific domain, and are those people who have experience, are they being kept abreast with those developments? Therefore, recurrent training is the only thing that is able to assess whether they are keeping abreast, and if not, how do we then get to the point of retraining them? Because I think it is good enough to say that you can get somebody who has a degree in linguistics from a university. However, if they have 5-10 years experience, how sure are we that that person is still keeping abreast continuously? And I think recurrent training in this case would then be the best, one of the best solutions to go.
Lorato, we hear you in Kempton Park. We'll take David's call as the last one for this half hour. David, you have a minute. Go ahead. Oh, unfortunately, you've lost David's line. Well, David, unfortunately, you lost your minute there. 34701, if you'd like to write in your SMSs, that's our SMS hotline. It costs you R2 to SMS us here on the show. You can also Facebook or tweet us AM Live on SAfm. This came through from Josh Beloy. No, it is compromised by the broadcasting of witness statements in the trial itself. I was listening to Johnson's testimony yesterday, and he was trying hard to align it to his wife's testimony. Snegugu Cyprian says it's compromised only if the judge doesn't understand most languages that the witnesses are speaking. Well, here's another challenge for the judges in the country. And Sikana Tuntulwana in KZN says it can only be in a liberated South Africa that the shortcomings of interpretation are noticed during the trial of a white man. Another unsigned SMS, surely a fourth and vital requirement for interpretation is skilled listening, definitely. An unsigned SMS, generally the quality is bad and does compromise justice. Chief Justice is right. I know from experience. And Joel in PE says, I've witnessed people being sentenced unfairly due to a pathetically woeful interpretation from English to isiXhosa. That's Joel in Port Elizabeth. 8:30, stay tuned. The Department of Justice is joining us to respond to some of these thoughts that you've been sharing with us about interpretation in the country. Stay tuned. 8:30 now, time for your full news bulletin. Here's Vibhakshini Chatty. Morning Talk comes up at 9 o'clock. It's host Rowena Bird, my jet-setting colleague, never in Joburg, Rowena.
Good morning, Darshan. It never ends indeed. Today we're coming to you live from the Pietermaritzburg Royal Showgrounds at the Legislature buildings. You know that Pietermaritzburg is the capital city of KwaZulu-Natal, and we're here for the State of the Province address by Premier Mr. Senzo Mchunu. We will speak about the KwaZulu-Natal Royal Household. A trust was actually established to facilitate the administration of the provincial government's commitments to the royal household, to the monarchy, and also to encourage fundraising efforts to help fund its needs. We'll explore that relationship more, the relationship between the provincial government and the royal family. We are also going to focus on education in this province, what works and what does not work. We'll speak to the chairperson of the portfolio committees for transport and also for conservation and environmental affairs to get a sense of what's happening in this regard in KZN. And at some point, Darshan, we're going to go into the legislature and listen in on the Premier's address, Mr. Senzo Mchunu, as he delivers his State of the Province address. And every now and then we're going to be listening to the ongoing trial. It's in its third day today of Oscar Pistorius, and get the latest news from the courtroom of Judge Thokozile Masipa. And that completes Morning Talk for today. Thank you, Darshan.
When it comes to procurement law, something that seems pretty straightforward turns into a maze of challenging issues. Matisin Ndlovu and Sidumedi attorneys has vast knowledge and understanding of the laws governing procurement in the public sector. For any procurement legal issues, call us on 011-268-5225. MNS Attorneys, legal expertise in your corner.
Save for a rainy day. That's what they always say. But they don't know when it'll rain. So how do I know I'll get a great rate and access to my money when I need it?
Eugene, with Nedbank Money Trader, you get a rate of 5.5% per annum. And you can access your funds in 24 hours. So it's there when you need it.
What about the fees?
Fees? There are no fees or commissions. And your capital is fully guaranteed.
Okay. Bring on the rain. Uh-oh.
Make saving for a rainy day happen. Visit any Nedbank today. Call 0860 555 111 or go to nedbank.coza. Terms and conditions apply. We're an authorized financial services and credit provider. Make things happen. Nedbank.
The Forum at 8 on SAfm.
24 minutes now to 9. Introducing the Department of Justice. Joining us on the line, Advocate Elias Mate is a Senior Legal Administration Officer responsible for language services at the Department of Constitutional Development and Justice. Advocate Mate, thank you very much for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Darshan. How are you?
We're doing well this morning, Advocate. I'm not sure if you've been able to listen into the conversation we've had for the last 37 minutes or so, but there have been personal experiences that some have shared about the way that justice is carried out, sometimes inappropriately because of a lack of proper interpretation. I mean, what's your feeling on this?
Yeah, Darshan, what we have done as a department after the Chief Justice raised issues concerning the quality of court interpreting that is provided in our courts, we had an intervention to capacitate the officials to provide effective language services in the courts. Court interpreting is required to facilitate the resolution of criminal, civil, and family law disputes. One way of doing this is to provide accessible, efficient, and quality interpreting to support the court's function so that the accused person are able to have a fair trial.
Do you think the Department of Justice is doing that? So do you think the Department of Justice is doing that,
yes,
providing a fairly high level of standards of these interpreters?
Yes, we do.
In light of the criticisms that have come, if I can ask you to engage, Mr. Ngalanga, I mean, perhaps you can give us some of the personal experiences you've had in court where perhaps justice has not been carried out correctly because of misinterpretation or misinterpretation by the interpreters in the case.
Yes, at times it does happen where, an interpreter who is appointed to provide a service lack the proper understanding because of recruitment problems. That we are currently addressing because we have established a task team advised by the Chief Justice with an objective to recommend a review of the curriculum that is provided by Justice College. And also we have indeed integrated the approach with the GAFITA, which provides leadership for interpreters. In the past 2 years, we have already provided training over 200 interpreters.
Advocate, how do they get into? Sure. Advocate, how did they get into the process in the very beginning? Because if it's true that these individuals are hired as matriculants, perhaps as freelancers or ad hoc staff, how did they get into the Department of Justice as interpreters and then require you to retrain them, require you to upskill them to do the job that you hired them to do in the very first place?
Let me give you the historical perspective. Initially, when interpreters were required, it was based on the proficiency of a language that the interpreter's proficient with. It was not a qualification requirement. After the involvement of court interpreting, it was realized that a qualification is required. Then matric was a relevant requirement with an additional at least 3 indigenous languages that a person speaks. If you look at the current recruitment, we are saying an interpreter should have a matric, should at least be proficient in 3 languages, so that the court, where the person is appointed, especially you look at the needs of a particular court. If a person is appointed in Pretoria Court, you look at the needs of that particular court in terms of the languages that are required on a daily basis.
So those interpreters being hired today, those interpreters being hired by the Department of Justice today, are being hired at a higher standard than those who were hired in the past? Are they?
Mm.
And they are required to have matric certificates and other qualifications in order to interpret. Kirsten Whitworth, I mean, is this enough to allay our fears from what we've heard over the last 40 minutes or so?
I don't believe it is. What worries me is that translating and interpreting, and firstly, yes, translating and interpreting are so vastly different. The difference between them is the difference between print media and radio. That's how different they are. But having a qualification in translation or interpreting is a professional qualification. And it's not seen as such, and languages are completely dismissed. It's assumed that if you can speak a language, well, you can go and translate or interpret, and that's not the case. Before I became a lawyer, I was a translator, and I find translation very easy, and I'm lucky that I can pick up languages quickly. But I will not go near interpreting because it's truly a terrifying experience. It's incredibly difficult. But it's not seen. But I have never been seen as a professional until I became a lawyer. So we need to firstly change the perception that if you speak 2 languages, you can interpret. That's not the case at all.
Johan Blow?
But secondly, no, I'd like to carry on with my point, please.
Sure.
So secondly, we need to address what we're paying our interpreters. you cannot pay people in the region of 320 rand per day. That is not an acceptable salary, and then expect to get professionals. And I'd like to address what we are paying our court interpreters, because I think that is also going to, because how are you going to attract and retain professionals and have a high standard if that's what you're paying?
Johan Blow, would you like to add to that?
I couldn't hear properly, so unfortunately I'd have to ask Kirsten to repeat just about everything as she seemed to cut away. But I have to go, and can I give you a concluding thought about the training system?
Sure.
The system as it exists in Department of Justice works fairly well for Department of Justice because people are appointed on the basis of their language skills. They do get in-service training. They go to Justice College, and they work under senior interpreters. So that doesn't work too badly, in my opinion, because we've got excellent interpreters in the system. The problem comes with the people, like we've referred to in the past, who are freelancers or who do it on an ad hoc basis, where there's no way of ascertaining their track record as interpreters. And people look, for example, for an interpreter who can do interpreting between Polish and English. There's virtually nobody in the country who can quality control such an interpreter. And you have to assume this person says, I can do the job, and therefore can do the job. And unfortunately, that is an erroneous assumption.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Johan Blow is the chairman of the South African Translators Institute. Unfortunately, has to leave us right now, but we are still joined by Joe Ngalanga, magistrate in Pretoria and chairperson of the Education and Training Committee at the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. Let's go to the lines then. We've got 0891 104 2008. Sabelo on the line in Stellenbosch. Sabelo, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Yes, my concern with this poor issue of interpreters is when the attorneys as well in the court decides to run with a misinterpretation of the interpreter to suit their convenience, you know. And one example specifically on this Oscar case is when Michel Berger said that Diermakar aangehaat. And then the interpreter interprets that as I was confused last night, you know, and on that night. And Barry Roo is well versed in both languages, and he conveniently chooses to run with the misinterpretation because he wanted to paint the witness as being confused in that specific night, so that he can paint her evidence as being influenced by her confusion and all of those things. You see, so for me, really, it's also I see it as an unethical issue when lawyers who understand both languages conveniently choose to run with a misinterpretation when it suits them, and when it does not suit them, they clearly are willing to point it out. That's just my
Sabelo, thanks for that call there, Sabelo at Stellenbosch. Well, of course, isn't that the loophole you leave open when we translate something or interpret it incorrectly? It leaves it open for the defense or the prosecution to take advantage of it. Given in Butterworth is a interpreter rather, who joins us on the line. Given, good morning.
Good morning, Taushen.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and good morning to your panel. I'm a court interpreter based here in Butterworth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I've attended numerous court trainings at Justice College, beginners course, sexual offences course, advanced course, as well as expert language course. And they are doing fairly well. For me, actually, I'm doing well in court. Now, to judge interpreters based on one interpreter who was interpreting in the case of Mr. Pretorius, I think that is unfair.
Is it unfair when it's the most high-profile case in the country, perhaps the trial of the century, as many people are asking, and the focus being on this country, on our justice system, on the way that we work? Is it unfair for the world media to judge us on this very high-profile case, which we knew the world was going to be monitoring, given?
I think the principal who stationed at that court, he or she was supposed to get a highly skilled interpreter for that case, when in fact it's known that the whole world is listening and looking at South Africa.
Given, you've hit exactly onto the point. Given, thank you very much for that call from Butterworth. I'm going to put that back to you, Advocate Mate. I mean, isn't that the point? There was so much focus on this case, a spotlight on this case, a highlights of this case. There's a 24-hour channel that's dedicated to this case. Wasn't there enough pressure on the Department of Justice to get this one right from the start?
Darshan, thank you. This matter is still under a sub judice. However, I want to point to you that the arrangements were made in advance for a competent interpreter to provide interpreting in this matter. One is Bosch, who's proficient, who dealt with the case in June last year, you will remember during the bail application, was appointed to deal with the matter. Unfortunately, when she was introduced to the presiding judge, she became emotional and she could not handle I don't know what was actually happening. She could not deal with the matter. Hence, an alternative interpreter was sought by the trust team, which were involved in the preparation of this matter. Hence, the provision of a principal interpreter, Mr. Mutsamai, to provide interpreting on the first day. On the second day, Mrs. Hendricks, an African female, was also secured to provide and assist with the interpreting services on this case.
Do you think the Department of Justice has too low standards on interpretation, considering what we've heard already, that you're supposed to have this broad knowledge of not just the language, but also what Kirsten Whitworth is saying, a broad knowledge on the technical subject, the terms that may be used in court, the translation for those terms in court, knowledge of the subject matter, and knowing about the legal fraternity, how courts work. Are your standards just too low and you're letting just anyone in with a matric certificate?
I will concur with the previous speaker from Butterworth, the interpreter, who confirmed what strides the department is taking in terms of developing interpreters. The standards are not low, the standards are very high, because we provide all the areas which are required before our court. We have engaged also tertiary institutions. I can confirm that Mr. Johan Blay from SAfm was part of the panel that developed a qualification for interpreters, a diploma qualification with all the tertiary institutions in the country. I mean, that can tell you the first university, UNISA, University of Free State, is currently for the past year been running with a membership for interpreters. That proves to you that the quality of our interpreters is high.
And Advocate, of course, you're able to attract the top quality because you're paying the best at 320 Rand a day. Do you think you're able to attract the quality that you need in court interpreters?
Let me assure you something here. There are two different approaches. There are those interpreters, if you read the Constitution, Section 35.3K provides us we need to provide interpreting in all the official languages, including those languages which are preferred by the witnesses or accused persons. At times you find there are those scarce foreign languages that we do not have in the country, that we have to solve our interpreters from. And what happens, we have a tariff committee that is currently reviewing the tariffs that are payable to those casual foreign interpreters. But in terms of the permanent pool of interpreters, we have provided, the best packages available in terms of the cost of the department.
Magistrate Ngalanga joining us on the line. Do you still agree with the Chief Justice, Magistrate, that if the language services were taken over by the judiciary away from the Department of Justice, a better job would be done of language services in court?
I would still see that happening, and I doubt if the current workings of the department will allow that, my view is that language services are special skill of that particular section. I think, therefore, my view is that it should be handled by people who are specifically trained in languages.
Magistrate, though, we're hearing from the Department of Justice talking about retraining, talking about improving the quality of our interpreters. I mean, that must give you some faith, at least. He says they're attracting the best in the business.
Yeah, there are a lot of suggestions or recommendations I can make in this respect. I agree fully that training should be one of them. Not only training in language, but also training on issues like social context, which are important for one to interpret. The other one, because the other reason for this inherent problem is when you look at the Constitution and the Magistrates Court Act, Section 35(3)(k) of the Constitution read with Section 6 of the Magistrates Court Act. The South African situation is that only 2 languages are languages of record, 20 years in democracy, which to me is an anomaly. My view is that that section of the Magistrates Court Act is not in line with the Constitution. So my feeling is that to alleviate the problem, perhaps the Department of Justice should lead a process. I think somewhere they are piloting this. They should lead a process where in certain, at the regional level, certain regions have got the right to go beyond English and Afrikaans as language of record. For instance, if you go to certain areas, let's take a case in Eastern Cape called Zolisha, and perhaps a case in Mthatha. In a number of cases in those regions, you will find that every person in court, the interpreter, the magistrate, the local attorney, the prosecutor, are all Xhosa speaking. But because of Section 6, that record must be in English. So if you take away that requirement in the Magistrates Court Act and come up with, say, Xhosa, because the predominant language, shall also be a second language of record. So it takes away the requirement in Section 6 of the Magistrates Court Act. So therefore, in that scenario, you may not need an interpreter, because everybody else is speaking that language. So to me, this is one of the areas where the Department of Justice should speed up. They need the political will to do it.
Kirsten, I mean, do you agree with that? And do you agree that the judiciary should take away the language services from the Department of Justice?
I don't know the kind of agree.
Not entirely sorry.
Kirsten, go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure where the language services should be housed. I'm a bit ambivalent on exactly where. I do note that the South African Language Practitioners Council bill was passed by the National Assembly yesterday, and that has proposals to regulate the language professions, which is it's an interesting step, and it's not without its problems, not least because the bill doesn't talk about exactly how that's going to be implemented. But it is a step in terms of regulating how the language professions can be regulated. And one of the problems in terms of inconsistency and lack of professionalism and the fact that people can go and be put into courts with no experience is the fact that it's been unregulated. So it's, I think it would be useful to have a further discussion on exactly, the practicalities of that bill. But obviously the process still has a way to go. It's only gone through the National Assembly so far. But I think that could well address some of the issues we've been discussing today. We need uniformity of training. We need language to be taken seriously. I think there are general assumptions that languages are given, and that's just due to our structures of power.
It's assumed that if you speak the language, then you can interpret it in court.
Well, it's not only that, but it's who's in, the languages of power in this country are English and Afrikaans. And so if you're in power, you assume that everyone can converse with you in that language because you've never really had to worry about language. So there's an assumption that everyone else can kind of get by.
Well, let's give the Department of Justice a chance to respond right after this. Stay tuned.
The National Energy Regulator, in collaboration with the University of Johannesburg, will host the second South African Economic Regulators Conference from 18 to 19 March 2014 at Birchwood Hotel in Boksburg, Ekurhuleni. The conference theme is Economic Regulation in Africa. How can economic regulators best facilitate infrastructure expansion? Papers will be presented by a wide range of industry experts and practitioners involved in regulated infrastructure development. Registration is essential. Seats are limited and on a first-come, first-served basis. To register, visit the National Energy Regulators website at nersa.org.za.
South Africa's cities are becoming more integrated through better public transport. The city of Joburg is rolling out the Ria Vaya system, combining bus and taxi systems to serve residents. Cape Town and Tshwane are following with new integrated networks. 12 cities will be covered. The Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission. Together, we are changing lives.
The Forum at 8 on SAfm.
Greg in East London says, I find it difficult to believe that a competent interpreter simply couldn't be summoned for this high-profile case. Ayanda Zinuku at Nonibe says, interpreting standards are poor all over the country. The solution, better qualifications and a good salary. Advocate Mate, is the solution also to take the language services away from the Justice Department and hand it over to the judiciary?
Unfortunately, the department does not have a formal communication of the request by the Chief Justice. And for your information and the panel, I want to confirm that based on the issues raised by the Chief Justice, we have established a task team that is looking at the career passing of interpreters. This task team is composed of a number of stakeholders: the judiciary, the judge president or a judge, members from the NTA, members from Legal Aid South Africa, the Chief Magistrate Forum, the Regional Court President Forum, and other court performance stakeholders. The approach is to investigate and review the training that is currently provided and for the development intervention for interpreters. And also we are having collaboration with SAfm, which has issued discretionary grants for the uplifting of the skills of interpreters. We have also established collaboration with tertiary institutions. We had meetings the previous year on how to take the issues of interpreting to upskill them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Elias Mate. We have to leave it there with you. The Department of Justice joining us on the line. Kirsten Whitworth is the attorney at the Centre for Applied Legal Studies. Earlier, we were joined by Johan Blow, the chairman of the South African Translators Institute, and Joe Ngalanga, magistrate in Pretoria and chairperson of the Education and Training Committee at the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. Thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation. David Mtunzi in Mabato, I'll leave you with his SMS. He says, with the glare of world media on us, we failed to showcase the best that we have to that world. David Mtunzi in Mabato. Thanks for that SMS. And to you, thank you for your calls, your SMS, your tweets, and your Facebook comments this morning. I'll join you again 6 to 9 a.m. tomorrow. My name is Darshan Midley. Have a great day. Rowena Bird's up next, and Babakshini Chetty with your 9 o'clock news. Stay tuned.